The man in the leather armor did not lower his bow. His eyes stayed locked on the rebels, and his stance showed he was ready to act if they made the wrong move. One of the rebels stepped forward, his hand on his sword, but the man's voice cut through the night. He told them that if they wanted to live, they would turn around and leave. The firmness in his tone left no room for argument. After a tense silence, the rebels slowly backed away into the trees. The sound of their footsteps faded until the forest was quiet again. Lara let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the stranger. He lowered his bow and stepped closer, his gaze softening when he saw her fear. He asked if she was hurt, and she shook her head. The maid thanked him for saving them. The man introduced himself as Ethan. He explained that he had been hunting near the area. When he saw the rebels moving through the forest, he had followed them, not knowing who they were after, until he saw Lara in their path. Ethan noticed the pouch in her hand and the way she held it close. He guessed she was someone important, but he did not ask. Instead, he told them they could not stay where they were. The rebels might return with more men. The safest place for now was his cabin deep in the mountains, far from the reach of the enemy. The journey was long and the forest paths were uneven. Ethan led the way, moving with skill and quiet confidence. Alara and the maid followed, their steps quick to keep up. The sounds of the night surrounded them, the call of owls, the rustle of leaves, and the distant flow of a river. Every now and then, Ethan would stop and listen, his eyes scanning the shadows before moving forward again. By the time they reached the cabin, the moon was high in the sky. The cabin was small but strong, built from thick logs and hidden among tall pine trees. Inside, the fire burned low in the hearth, casting a warm light over the wooden walls. Ethan gave them water and bread, and they sat near the fire to rest. Alara watched him as he checked the windows and doors. There was something about the way he moved, careful, ready, and alert. She wondered who he was before this life in the mountains. The maid soon fell asleep in a chair, but Alara stayed awake, her mind filled with the events of the day. She wanted to ask Ethan why he had helped them, but she kept silent for now. In the quiet, Ethan finally spoke. He told her that years ago, he had served as a royal guard. He had sworn to protect the crown, but a mission had gone wrong, and he had left the city in shame. Since then, he had lived alone, far from the troubles of the kingdom. But when he saw the rebels threatening her, something inside him refused to let it happen. Lara felt a small spark of trust grow between them. She thanked him again, and he nodded without a word. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time since leaving the castle, she felt a small measure of safety. But she knew the danger was far from over. The rebels would be hunting for her, and the kingdom was still in the hands of traitors. Death. As the night grew deeper, Ethan told her they would need to leave the cabin soon. Staying in one place for too long was risky. He would take them to a hidden valley where a few loyal men still lived. From there, they could plan what to do next. Alara agreed, knowing she could not return to the castle yet. When morning came, the first light touched the peaks of the mountains. Ethan packed supplies and armed himself with both bow and sword. Alara tightened her grip on the pouch, remembering her mother's words. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing with Ethan by her side. She had a chance to survive and perhaps one day reclaim all that had been taken. Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pools. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. The city of Valoria was alive with the sound of the market as merchants shouted their prices and children ran between stalls. The tall stone towers of the castle stood high above the noise, watching over the people below. Inside the castle, Princess Alara walked along the great hall with a soft smile. Her long dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her light blue dress trailed across the marble floor. She was loved by her people, and she loved them in return. Life in the castle had always been safe for her. Guards patrolled the gates, and the walls had never been breached. Alara believed her world would always stay this way. But on this day, something began to change. The sound of running feet echoed down the hall. A servant hurried toward her, pale and breathless, whispering words she could hardly understand. The queen was calling for her, and there was no time to waste. When Alara reached the throne room, she saw the queen speaking with her most trusted advisor. Their faces were tense. The advisor explained that a group of nobles had betrayed the crown. They had gathered soldiers and were marching toward the castle. The gates might not hold for long. Ilara's heart pounded as she tried to understand the danger. She had never seen her mother look so worried. The queen gave her a small pouch and told her to keep it safe. It held a ring that had belonged to her father, a symbol of the royal line. If the worst happened, Ilara would need it to prove her right to the throne. Before she could ask more questions, the sound of shouting filled the air. The castle guards were calling for reinforcements. Steel clashed against steel somewhere beyond the Great Hall. The queen ordered one of the maids to take Ilara to the hidden tunnels beneath the castle. These tunnels were known only to a few and led far beyond the walls. Ilara followed the maid through winding passages lit only by torches. Her steps were quick and uneven, fear pressing at her chest. She could hear distant cries and the deep rumble of something breaking apart. As they neared the tunnel exit, Ilara looked back. Smoke was beginning to rise from the towers. The air smelled of fire. The maid pushed her forward, urging her to run. Outside the tunnel, the cool night air met her face. They moved into the cover of the trees, the sounds of battle fading slowly behind them. But safety was still far away. Not long after they left the tunnel, the maid stopped suddenly. A group of armed men stood blocking their path. Their armor carried the crest of the rebel nobles. One of them stepped forward and told them to surrender. Ilara clutched the pouch in her hand and tried to stay calm. She had no idea what to do. The maid stepped in front of her, trying to shield her from view. The men laughed and began to move closer. Ilara felt trapped. There was nowhere to run. Just as the first man reached for her arm, a sharp sound cut through the air. An arrow struck the ground between them. The men looked around, startled. From the shadows of the trees, a figure appeared. It was a man in worn leather armor, carrying a bow in one hand and a sword at his side. His eyes were steady, and his steps were slow but sure. The rebels turned to face him, but he did not flinch. Without a word, he raised his bow and aimed again. The moment felt frozen, like the world was holding its breath. Ilara had never seen him before, but something about his presence felt safe. She did not yet know his name or why he was here, but she sensed he would not let harm come to her. The rebels glanced at one another, unsure whether to fight or flee. The man kept his aim steady, his voice calm as he told them to leave. The air between them was tense, and Ilara could only wait to see what would happen next. Ethan led Ilara and the maid out of the mountains before sunrise. The air was cold and mist curled around the trees. They moved quietly, each step careful to avoid making too much noise. Ethan kept his bow ready, his eyes scanning the forest. He knew the rebels would not give up easily. They would be searching every road and trail. The path was rough and uneven. Roots twisted underfoot, and fallen branches blocked their way. Ilara stumbled once, but Ethan caught her arm before she fell. He said nothing, only gave her a short nod before they kept moving. The maid stayed close behind, clutching her shawl tightly.
Ow.
By midday, they reached the edge of a wide river. The water rushed past, cold and fast. Ethan knew the rebels would expect them to cross at the nearest bridge, so he decided they would cross here instead. He found a shallow point where the water barely reached his knees. Even so, the current was strong. Ethan went first, helping Ilara and the maid across one at a time. On the other side, they stopped to rest under a cluster of tall oaks. Ethan gave them bread and dried meat from his pack. Ilara ate quietly, her eyes on the forest beyond. She could not shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Ethan noticed her unease and told her they would move again soon. That afternoon, the forest began to thin, and open fields stretched before them. In the distance, low hills rolled toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills was the valley Ethan had spoken of. But reaching it would not be easy. Without the cover of trees, they would be easier to spot. They moved quickly, keeping low and staying near the tall grass. Once, they heard the sound of hooves in the distance and dropped to the ground until it passed. Ilara's heart pounded in her ears, and she gripped the pouch her mother had given her. Every moment felt heavy with danger. By the time the sun began to set, they reached the base of the hills. Ethan found a small hollow between two large rocks where they could hide for the night. He built a small fire, keeping it low so the light would not give them away. As the flames flickered, Ilara finally asked the question she had been holding back. She wanted to know why he had chosen to help her. When it was clear, it put him in danger. Ethan stared into the fire for a moment before answering. He told her that when he left the Royal Guard, he had thought his life of service was over. But when he saw her, something in him remembered what it meant to protect someone who could not protect themselves. He said he could not walk away, not this time. Ilara listened, feeling a mix of gratitude and guilt. She knew her presence had already put him in harm's way. She promised herself she would not waste the chance he had given her. If they reached the valley, she would find a way to gather loyal people to take back the kingdom. That night she slept lightly, waking often at the sound of the wind or a crack of branches. Ethan stayed awake, keeping watch. His eyes scanned the darkness, every shadow a possible threat. He knew the rebels would not stop until they found her. When dawn broke, the sky was pale with the first light of day. They set out again, climbing the hills. The air was fresh, and the view from the top stretched far in every direction. Ethan pointed toward a distant cluster of trees in the valley below. That was their destination. Somewhere there, friends waited. But as they began the descent, a shout rang out from behind them. Ethan spun around and saw figures on horseback cresting the hill they had just climbed. The rebels had found their trail. Without hesitation, Ethan told Ilara and the maid to run for the valley, while he stayed behind to slow their pursuers. Ilara's eyes widened, but she knew there was no time to argue. She turned and ran, the maid close behind, as Ethan drew his sword and faced the oncoming riders. Ethan stood firm on the hillside, his sword gripped tightly in his hand. The riders closed the distance fast, their horses kicking up dirt and dust. He knew he could not fight them all for long, but his goal was not to win. It was to give Ilara and the maid enough time to reach the valley. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, blocking the narrow path. The first rider charged at him, swinging a blade. Ethan sidestepped quickly and struck the man across the arm, knocking him from his horse. The second rider tried to circle around, but Ethan turned and blocked the strike, forcing the man back. The sound of clashing steel filled the air. Ethan moved with precision, each motion calculated, but the riders kept coming. Down the slope, Ilara and the maid ran as fast as they could. The valley still seemed far away, but they did not stop. Ilara's heart raced, and every muscle in her legs burned. She looked back once and saw Ethan holding off the rebels alone. The sight filled her with both fear and determination. She knew she had to make it, or his sacrifice would be for nothing. Back on the hill, Ethan fought off another attacker, sending the man tumbling to the ground. But more riders appeared from the far side of the ridge. He realized he could not hold the hill much longer. With a sharp whistle, he startled the horses of two rebels, causing them to rear up and throw their riders. Using the moment, he broke into a run down the hillside, leading the remaining pursuers away from Ilara's path. Ilara and the maid reached the lower edge of the hill and entered a stretch of tall grass. The stalks rose above their heads, hiding them from view. They moved quickly but carefully, not wanting to draw attention. The sounds of the fight grew distant, replaced by the rustle of the grass and the calls of birds overhead. A small stream wound its way through the land, and beyond it stood a cluster of cottages hidden between trees. From one of the cottages, a man stepped out. He wore simple clothes but carried himself with the confidence of someone used to command. His eyes widened when he saw Ilara, and he hurried forward. She explained in short, breathless words who she was and what had happened. The man nodded, understanding at once. He led them into the largest cottage and called for others to gather. Within minutes, several men and women arrived, each one armed and ready. These were the loyal people Ethan had spoken of. But Ilara's thoughts were not at rest. She could not stop thinking about Ethan. She told the man in charge that he was still out there, facing the rebels. Without hesitation, he ordered two of his best riders to go and find him. Ilara waited, her hands gripping the pouch tightly, every moment feeling longer than the last. Back in the hills, Ethan had led the rebels into a narrow ravine, where the rocks and steep walls made it hard for them to use their horses. He fought on foot now, using the tight space to his advantage. Two rebels charged at him together, but he ducked low, forcing them to crash into each other. Still, his strength was beginning to fade. Just as a third rebel raised his sword to strike, the sound of galloping hooves echoed from the ravine entrance. Two riders swept in, knocking the attacker away. One of them shouted for Ethan to get on. Without wasting a moment, he climbed onto the horse and they sped away, leaving the rebels behind. When they reached the valley, Ethan saw Alara standing outside the cottage. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. She ran to meet him, and though no words passed between them at first, the look they shared said enough. He had kept his promise, and she was safe. That night, the loyal group gathered around a long wooden table. They spoke of plans to take back the kingdom and drive the rebels from the castle. Ethan listened quietly, knowing the hardest battles were still to come. But for now, they had a place to rest, and they were together. That alone was enough to give them hope for the days ahead. The valley woke early. People here were used to working with the sun, and the sound of tools and voices filled the air before the light was fully bright. Inside the largest cottage, Alara sat at the table with Ethan and the leader of the valley. A map lay spread out before them, showing the castle and the roads that led to it. They were planning their next move. The leader explained that the rebels had taken full control of the city. They had stationed guards on every road and at every gate. The loyal forces had been scattered, but small groups still fought in secret. If these groups could be brought together, there was a chance to take back the throne. Alara listened closely, her hand resting on the pouch her mother had given her. Ethan studied the map carefully, pointed out weak points in the rebel control and paths through the hills that could hide their approach. The leader nodded, agreeing with his ideas. They decided that messengers would be sent to the loyal groups, calling them to gather in the valley. When enough men and women had arrived, they would march on the city. Over the next days, the valley became busy with preparations. Riders came and went with news. Some brought food, others brought weapons. Alara helped where she could, speaking to the people and giving them hope. She could see in their eyes that they were ready to fight for their home. Ethan trained the fighters, showing them how to move quietly and strike fast. He worked alongside them every day, his presence giving them confidence. At night, he kept watch with a few others, making sure no spy or rebel scout came near the valley. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned red, the first of the loyal forces arrived. They came in small groups, each one greeted with cheers. Old friends reunited and strangers shook hands, bound by the same goal. Alara welcomed each group personally, thanking them for their courage. When the final group arrived, the valley was full of armed men and women. The leader called everyone together. Standing before them, Alara spoke. She told them of the day the rebels came, of her escape, and of the people who had helped her survive. She reminded them of the kingdom they had lost and the peace they could bring back. Her voice was steady, and her words lit a fire in the hearts of those who listened. That night, the fighters rested for the battle ahead. Ethan sat alone for a while, sharpening his sword. He thought about the fight they were walking into. It would be dangerous, and not all of them would return. But he knew this was the right path. Before dawn, the valley moved out. The march to the city was silent, except for the sound of boots and hooves. They moved through the hills, staying hidden until the walls of the city rose before them. The plan was simple. Two groups would attack from the gates, while Ethan and a small team would lead Alara through the old servant tunnels into the castle. The moment the signal was given, the battle began. The sound of steel and the cries of fighters filled the air. Ethan led Alara through the tunnels, moving quickly but carefully. When they reached the throne room, they found the rebel leader waiting. His sword was already drawn. Ethan stepped forward, facing him without fear. The two men fought fiercely, each strike ringing through the hall. Alara watched, unable to help, her hands clenched tight. At last, Ethan disarmed the rebel leader, sending his sword skidding across the floor. The loyal guards who had slipped in behind them seized the man. Alara walked to the throne and placed the ring from the pouch onto her finger. The loyal guards knelt before her, and for the first time since the coup, she felt the weight of her duty fully settle on her. The city was theirs again. When the fighting outside ended, the people of the city poured into the streets, cheering. Ethan stood beside Alara as she addressed them, promising to rebuild what had been broken. The road ahead would be long, but they had won back their home. As the sun set that day, Ethan looked at the city and then at Alara. He knew his place was by her side. Not as a guard bound by duty, but as a friend and protector who had chosen this path, and together they would face whatever came next. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.